Hello and welcome back to the Walking Dead Retrospective, where today we're finally going to begin our way through the infamous Negan saga. As most of you will probably know, both Seasons 7 and 8 are very controversial among fans for a long list of reasons, from the level of violence to pacing and everything in between. And as such, in our coverage of the Negan arc, we'll also be delving into the nitty-gritty details to try to understand what might have been the contributing factors to those mixed opinions. And without further ado, let us dive in. As usual, a new season means a look at the wider franchise and all the promotional material for the upcoming episodes. Though here too we have a bit of a special case, as due to the cliffhanger at the end of Season 6, opportunities for what to even post were extremely limited. We did of course get the usual character portraits, which very fittingly were depicting the lineup, but when it comes to locations and everything else of that nature, there was very little. As I briefly touched on in the previous part, whether you like the cliffhanger or not, this is merely an externality caused by that decision. And it's safe to say that in terms of promotional material, the season did suffer. And while yes, the cliffhanger did bring in an absolutely insane number of viewers for the reveal even with the lackluster marketing, I still wonder how much interest dropped off because viewers had no clue what to look forward to. Obviously we're not talking about people familiar with the book and hardcore fans, but more so the general audience. Could it be that after seeing Negan's introduction, the show painted too dark of a picture and didn't have any sort of light at the end of the tunnel? We'll obviously never know for sure, but I think it's a fascinating case considering the response to the premiere. Though speaking of promo, we're yet to talk about the Christmas for Walking Dead fans, Comic-Con and the trailer. Though unfortunately, here I'll just have to repeat basically what I just said. Because just like general promo, the trailer contains literally zero scenes with anyone in the lineup, which is basically all the main characters. And not only that, more than half of it is just recap. And what in retrospect is the worst part is the after credits scene. Because while it is usually some sort of huge reveal like Merle returning or the radio of Terminus or something like that, for this trailer, it's the infamous Oceanside episode, where Heath goes missing forever simply because the actor left the show. And as much as it pains me to say this considering just how much I love the Negan saga, I think this trailer is far and away the worst one in the series. It does unfortunately just suffer from a bit of a perfect storm, as the whole Heath thing is obviously something they couldn't even really predict. But even ignoring that, the new scenes we get to see are just super limited in their scope. Though obviously, because I am a bit of a Walking Dead turbo nerd, I do think there are some big wins in this trailer. The first and most obvious one is Shiva. I'd go as far as to say that Ezekiel and his tiger were number 2 on my most anticipated characters after Negan. And the worst part about it is that there were rumors floating around that due to budgetary constraints, having a tiger in the series would simply be too costly. Especially considering the whole Rick Hand thing never happened because of those budget questions. So seeing Shiva in her full glory in the trailer was a big win. And also, note the quality of CG here. It is obviously very good, right? And you probably know what I'm getting at, but just hold that thought for now. Secondly, and this should come as no surprise at this point, the music choice was excellent as usual. Even the song name of Take It All is basically just like, yep, this is Negan. And speaking of the big man, I think the narrative of the trailer is actually super strong. Clearly the through line here is Negan. The whole beginning is him deciding the character's fate, then there's Dwight basically speaking for Negan saying that everything is his, and then we're right back into Negan's narration. Absolutely everything revolves around him. Even the beats of the music coincide with him bringing down the bats. So all in all, I think the editors did as good of a job as they reasonably could have given the material they had to work with. Though even with all that praise, as I already said, I do think that it is unfortunately a bit of a blunder. But before we move on from Comic-Con, there's another thing I want to mention here. Again, I am a turbo nerd, so I watched absolutely everything to do with Walking Dead, but if you've never watched any of the coverage, there's a roughly hour-long panel where the cast and crew basically just talk about all things to do with the show. Be it their character journeys or behind-the-scenes shenanigans. Well, in this particular Comic-Con, we get the infamous glitter bomb story. The story goes that after a scorching day on set, Norman decided to mess with Andrew and filled his car's AC with glitter. And believe it or not, we are lucky enough to have the whole thing documented.
You're still going, dude. How much did you put in here?
So much in there. A nice ride home in the heat, bro.
I'm sweating.
Following this point, Andy clearly needed to have revenge. And because he tells it much better than I ever could, enjoy his retelling.
I drove home from that point, and there were people at red lights looking at me like I was, like I've been clubbing or to a club, you know what I'm saying? And then I went, I thought I'm gonna have to, before I go home and get humiliated, I kind of went and vacuumed the thing up, and it took me 25 minutes. And I was beating up with sweat and all the rest of it. I got back in the car, and I cranked up the aircon again, and it just went to my sweaty face. And then I went to the coffee shop, and they said, "You've got something in your hairline." Now they're calling me Sparkles, Glitter Boy. I used to be somebody in my own hometown. And when I got on the plane to go to San Diego, my 2 children had tears in their eyes. And they said, "What did Nanny Norman do?" And I said, "Sweetheart, he's humiliated your father on an international scale." And they said, "What can we do?" And I said, so believe me, this isn't the end. Oh, man. Oh, dear.
It's in your beard! That could not have backfired more! Oh, dear. Yeah.
Honestly, with the number of behind-the-scenes stories, I feel like I should do a mini spin-off at some point. Though because we needed some levity before we get to Negan, I thought this would be a perfect little tangent. And I know this is completely unrelated, but in a bit of a meta sense, this is why I will always give adaptations a shot. All things considered, even with the many problems we've talked about, I would still call the Walking Dead adaptation an absolutely excellent one. I mean, there's a reason why I've produced hours and hours of content on it, right? And that is why I will never understand why people just never give them a shot to begin with. Obviously, there are a lot of very bad examples of adaptations going terribly wrong. But when they go right, aren't these sorts of behind-the-scenes stories just magical? It's something that could never happen with any other medium, right? Basically, what I'm saying here is that I just think people need to be a little bit more open-minded when it comes to adaptations. I take the stance of, if it's bad, we just forget about it, there's still the original. If it's great, then I mean, hey, we have The Walking Dead, right? Avatar live action, please be good. And the last little mini tangent I want to go on is about the Walking Dead Alien issue that was released around this time. And while this sort of mini spin-off is not the first of its kind, this one was super interesting because it tells the story of Jeffrey Grimes in Spain. And yes, it is not a coincidence, this is Rick's brother. And while it is not actually penned by Kirkman himself, he has confirmed that in his mind it is 100% canon. And considering that it never came into play in the books, it makes me wonder whether the whole spin-off series set in Europe deal might have taken some inspiration of it. I suppose only time will tell, but when it comes to the book, it is a fun read as it's certainly quite a bit different from the mainline series, but it never really affects the story in any way whatsoever. Finally, moving closer to the story itself, because we've talked so much about how the producers did everything in their power to keep the Negan victim under wraps, I think we'd be doing them a disservice if we didn't talk about how that actually went. As you'd expect, obviously the true victims leaked, but it's not really as simple as that. Because what also leaked were the alternate, real scenes from the show. The most well-known one is of course the infamous Maggie one. Once people saw this, it was pretty much game over, right? I mean, it's literally a real scene from the show. So there it is, case closed, right? Well, not entirely. The thing is, we were also told that they had filmed each and every one of them getting bonked as an extra measure to throw off spoilers. And a while before the Maggie leak, another incident happened that raised suspicion among fans. Greg Nicotero, the main makeup effects artist for the series, posted this image on Instagram with a statue of Daryl. And while that is all fun and games, in the background we see a dummy that looks awfully similar to Aaron. And surprise surprise, as soon as this was pointed out, the image was pulled. And what complicates the matter further is the fact that as soon as day one, many were indeed expecting Aaron to be the victim, simply because it is by far the safest pick. Sure, Aaron's important, but compared to literally everyone else in the lineup, he is not a major character. So again, a totally viable option with tangible proof behind it. What I'm trying to say here is that it was pretty clear that we were given a lot of red herrings by the production team themselves. And this was also later confirmed by Chandler Riggs, who revealed that 3 double deaths were filmed. The real one, Glenn and Abraham, and 2 fake ones, Maggie and Aaron, and Eugene and Aaron. Though even with all that, of course, basically everything about the premiere was leaked before it aired, and the victims were known during the summer months shortly after filming began. Obviously, the producers did as good of a job as they reasonably could have, especially considering that you actually had to look for the spoilers to find them. But in short, they just had an impossible task. There were plenty more fun leak and theory times, but I think that's better left for another video because I genuinely think the summertime before Season 7 is worthy of its own mini retrospective. And the very last thing I want to look at before I get into the season itself is the pacing, because this is an aspect of the season that left a lot to be desired for many people, including myself. To give you a raw number, it adapted 14 issues and 16 episodes, meaning it was the slowest season so far after Season 2. Obviously, that would also change with Season 8, but let's not rush ahead. Though the problems with Season 7 don't just stem from the fact that it didn't adapt a lot of material. Rather, I think it comes from the way it was adapted. In fact, I think there is just one critical factor that soured people on Season 7 right from the get-go, and that is the episode order. In the book, Issue 101 is all about how the group reacts to Negan. Their world has just been turned upside down, and clearly we just want to know what happens next. But in the show, they chose to move up the introduction of the kingdom to be episode 2, which would be fine in and of itself. But it is a focus episode and we don't get a single shot of Rick's group. Then we get to episode 3, The Cell, an episode entirely focused on the sanctuary, and again, not a single shot of Rick's group. And sure, you can say these two are technically filler episodes, but I genuinely believe both of them were great. The problem is that they came right after Negan's introduction, and in my opinion, people just didn't care. If we look at the ratings, obviously there is a massive drop-off after the premiere, which is notable, yes, but the real drop is likely much smaller since the premiere numbers were inflated due to the cliffhanger. Season 6 was generally trending below Season 5 and ended with just over 14 million viewers. So if we apply the same drop-off rate between Season 5 and 6, we'd expect roughly 13 million organic viewers to be there for the Season 7 premiere. So, adjusting the numbers, the drop-off is nowhere near as notable. What is notable, however, is the constant decrease in viewers week after week, something that does not normally happen. So again, I genuinely believe that it is the order of the episodes that doomed the first half of the season more than anything else. I'd go as far as to say that episode 2 and 3 could remain as bottle episodes. All you had to do was switch episode 4 to be the second one to give us an immediate follow-up to what happened after the lineup. And then after the 2 first episodes introducing Negan, number 1, you'd be cooking up the mystery of what's going on with Daryl, and 2, we'd get a bit of a breather from everything that just went down. Though concerning the outrage regarding brutality though, let me level with you, in my humble opinion, I don't think those claims hold any water and were mostly made by people who are professionals at finding problems in things they don't even care about. Don't get me wrong, yes, the premiere was pretty gnarly. But are we just not going to talk about Noah, who was literally ripped apart? Or better yet, Sam, a literal kid who too was ripped apart? As far as I'm concerned, it was a mix of people's favorite characters being killed off, and the sheer hype around the premiere that exacerbated those quote-unquote too violent claims. In fact, I am willing to bet that some of those claims came from people who have literally only seen the season 7 premiere just because of how hyped up it was and have not seen a single episode before or after. Because I'm sorry, if Glenn was too violent, then so was Noah and Sam. But surprise surprise, those episodes weren't hyped up among the general public and no one bat an eye. Pun very much intended. Though with all that said, for the sake of time, that's where we'll leave that for now. We'll touch on specific instances of pacing, filler, and everything else of that nature as we get to it, but for me, I think the content of the episodes, with a few notable exceptions, was mostly good. It's just the way it was given to us that caused a lot of mixed emotions in my opinion. But alright, enough dilly-dallying, let us get to what, despite the cliffhanger and all the controversies, I think is among the greatest, if not the greatest episode of the series. The day will come when you won't be. I've mentioned this before, but the title of the episode is in reference to what Jenner said back in season 1.
Grateful.
The day will come when you won't be.
Because yes, Negan's arrival could certainly make you rethink your decisions here and there. And as much as I'd like the iconic Something to Fear to be used as an episode title, I do think that this is a very good callback considering just how true it rings. As for the episode itself, this is a weird one, as it is both extremely faithful to the book, while still taking a lot of creative liberties in how it reveals Negan's victim. The biggest thing is of course the fact that we opened the episode with both Abraham and Glenn already dead, only we don't know that yet. Instead, Negan believes that Rick isn't quite broken yet, so they take a little trip in the RV. And as much as I keep calling Robert Kirkman a mad genius for coming up with this sort of stuff, I honestly think for this episode, both Greg Nicotero, who directed it, and Scott Gimple, who wrote it, deserve just as much praise. As I've said multiple times, I do fall in the camp of, we should have seen the reveal in the finale, but when it comes to the tone of this episode, they absolutely knocked it out of the park. Just how masterfully you're put right back into that sheer dread with Rick getting glimpses of the past, as that super dissonant, I want to say violin, plays in the background. And speaking of music, for this one more than ever, I have to bring up the mastermind that is Bear McCreary. He has a channel here on YouTube where he has given some insights into how some of the most iconic tracks in the series came to be. Though unfortunately, he doesn't have one breaking down the music we hear in this episode. But regardless, the absolutely heartbreaking and somber, yet still horror type of music is just incredible. And the amount of clashing emotions this episode brings is just on another level. There's that paralyzing fear, hatred and anger, complete and utter sadness, and about 50 other emotions at play. Basically what I'm getting at here is this is how you do filler. Yes, the shock factor of the book is gone, but I'll be the first to admit that when taken in isolation and ignoring the whole cliffhanger drama, this episode is a masterpiece. I genuinely believe that if there wasn't a ton of emotional investment in what happens here, critically speaking, this episode would be a 10 out of 10. But gushing aside, when it comes to the story, we follow Rick as Negan essentially plays a whole bunch of mind games with him. And again, this whole Rick-Negan first date is a TV show exclusive. But where I think they played it incredibly smart is when we cut back to the proper flashback and see the lineup again, because that is almost a one-for-one adaptation, essentially giving you the best of both worlds. And so with that, we find out our first victim, Big Man Abe. A couple of things to note here. Number one, and this probably won't come as a surprise, obviously, the shot we saw in the Season 6 finale was completely fake, in that it was shot at a completely different angle, with a completely different background, and in short, it was simply impossible to figure out who the victim is. Number two, because it was fake, the shots don't actually even line up. In the premiere, Abe of course gets back up and says his signature line before Negan goes back for the second swing, while in the finale, the timing is way off. Obviously I'm nitpicking here, but those are just some fun facts. But number three, I love that in the story context, by picking Abraham, Negan quite literally breaks their resistance. He is the biggest guy in the lineup after all, and he directly opposed Negan right away. So from a strategic point of view, picking Abraham just makes perfect sense. Number 4, and this is super tragic, the whole peace sign thing. As with all things, these two came in threes. The first time was after Pete's and Reg's deaths, where the drunk Abraham held up a peace sign at Sasha, who returned the gesture. The second time is when things get more interesting, as it was Sasha holding up the peace sign after switching patrols, meaning that she and Abraham would no longer patrol together. And the last time is the one we see here. A very small gesture, but a beautifully tragic moment in my opinion. Especially as we see Sasha recognize it and just crumble right away. In the book, on the other hand, everything surrounding the first victim is essentially the same, even with Negan's monologue being adapted basically word for word. Though the massive difference is that instead of Abraham, Negan picks Glenn, and there are no secret symbols or anything like that. Negan picks him, bonks him, and that's it. And before we get any further, remember that this issue came out in 2012, just after season 2 of the show wrapped up. And importantly, this was the first death of this caliber that happened with their respective characters already being cast. So with that in mind, Steven Yeun obviously had to give Kirkman a piece of his mind. And so we got the famous letter which was later featured in the letter hacks. For the sake of time, I'll give you an abridged version, but you can read the full thing in issue 102. Dear Robert, I hope this letter finds you well. That was a lie. I hope it finds you with tuberculosis. I hope when this letter finds you, you are lying in a pool of your own sweat as TB slowly courses through your lungs and your only thoughts are, why didn't I get that vaccine? And I shouldn't have eaten that spaghetti bolognese for lunch. Who do you think you are, huh? Seriously, who do you think you are? Do you think you are some cool guy? Some kind of really cool guy? Please! You are not a cool guy. You know who's a cool guy? Iceman from Top Gun, Benny the Jet Rodriguez from The Sandlot, Brad Pitt in Seven. You, sir, are not any of those guys. You don't have a fighter jet, you don't know how to get out of a pickle, and you most certainly don't know what's in the box. You are the antithesis of a cool guy. You're like the Aqualad of Young Justice. You're like the TI-80s of all TI calculators. You are the stupid murder storyline in season 2 of Friday Night Lights. He should have gone to jail. I can't believe you killed off Glenn in the 100th issue. What were you thinking? Hi, I'm Robert Kirkman. I created a really good comic character who basically carried the whole book for over 8 years and then decided to kill him off in the 100th issue. I like Vienna sausages and diet right. I also like sabotaging my own empire by destroying the hearts of the entire comic. You know what I could go for right now? A bag of a big bag of yeah, a large duffel filled with That's probably what you said. I'm fairly certain that's what you said. I'm like 96% sure that's what you said. Yeah, 96%. Foolish move, Kirkman. I'm coming for you. I'm coming for you fast and hard, Kirkman. Sincerely, Steven Yeun, Los Angeles, California. P.S. I would love an autograph. I have enclosed my mailing address. Thanks. To which Kirkman responded, well, Steven, if you don't mind me calling you that, I don't know what your profession is, but reading into this, the only job I feel certain you could hold down is that of Yeah, that's right. You seem like a real top-notch professional So being the you are, you probably don't understand the ins and outs of quality writing like I do, being a professional writer myself. Your brain would probably not be able to comprehend it. All of that said, after seeing the portrayal of Glenn on the TV show and the stellar performance by an actor whose name I can't seem to recall, ever really, it's quite strange. For me at least, the comic Glenn just became a pale impersonation of the TV character. So I figured I'm wasting my time with this guy, and the real dude is making the comic version just look bad. So I offed him. Blame that actor guy. If I could remember his name, I'd tell you to write him, but I don't, and I never do. So I can't. Sorry. Judging by my own comments, some people seemingly have trouble telling what's a joke and what isn't, so let me just remind you that Steven Yeun is the actor who plays Glenn, and this is just some good old bands. But with that said,
Back to it.
of course, the massive change in the adaptation is that it doesn't just stop there. Because Daryl jumps up and throws a punch at Negan, prompting him to remind the group that the first outburst by Glenn was free. Next one, not so much. And that's when we get that infamous scene of him joyfully flipping around and bonking Glenn, thereby recreating the comic book basically one for one. And with that, we have a 2-for-1 type change, because Daryl's outburst causes both Glenn to be bonked, as well as himself to be taken to Negan's compound. Because again, in the book, moments after Glenn's death, Negan just tells them he'll visit Alexandria for their first payment in a few days, and then his iconic ta-ta. Though with that said, because I've been going on so much about how I think the reveal should have taken place at the finale, let me just propose a very simple change that I think would have drastically changed how people remembered Negan's introduction. Essentially, my idea here is to shift some of the flashback into the present. So in the Season 6 finale, we'd see the Abraham death, which would prompt Daryl to jump up and punch Negan, following which, Negan would repeat the whole first one's free, but now, no exceptions. And then have him look toward Daryl and cut to black. And then we hear the, well, back to it, and everyone screaming, and it just cuts out.
That is a no-no. Back to it.
And with Season 7, it begins exactly how it did, only instead of having the double death in the flashbacks, we just see the second kill, that of course being Glenn. Simple as that. We'd have a satisfying conclusion to Season 6, and still the cliffhanger that AMC obviously wanted. Just imagine all the Daryl stans going crazy for like 6 months. It would be absolutely glorious. This obviously doesn't solve the trailer and promotional material problem, but those would require a more extensive rewrite in my opinion. I could honestly make an entire standalone video proposing many different edits that in my mind would improve the whole situation. Everything from immediately telling you that Rick is going to fight Negan as it happened in the books, instead of drawing out it for more than half a season among other things, but let's be honest, it's not really worth spending too much time on that now. Another massive change in the show is that after Rick's and Negan's date is over, they return to the lineup where he essentially forces Rick to chop off Carl's arm. I think I've nerded out over Andrew Lincoln's acting enough already, so I'll just say that his performance here was just yet again on another level. Of course people meme the whole snot bubble thing and everything, but like, in terms of acting, this is obviously an incredible performance. Oh, and side note, considering Carl is killed off next season, him actually losing the arm here could have been a super interesting remix for the show. Though, considering the response to the episode, maybe that would have been too much. But looking at the bigger picture, I think it's safe to say that Negan's introduction left a bigger mark on Rick in the show. He picked 2 people instead of just one, he played mind games with him to make him submissive, and he then forced him to mutilate his own son, all while laughing about the entire thing. Which, not surprisingly, also changed everything that will come next in the story. But we've still got a few things to cover here, so we'll tackle all of those as we get to them in later installments. In the book, following Negan's departure, we see a lot of tension in the group flare up, most of all with Maggie, who heads straight for Rick and begins repeatedly punching him. Clearly being aware of the magnitude of the situation, Rick just lays there and even asks, "Why did you stop?" Though before they can even talk anything out, Carl raises a gun on Maggie, telling her to stop hitting his dad, prompting Sophia to jump up, screaming at Carl that it's her mother, and she bites him on the arm. Clearly, everyone here is traumatized, and this is just a depiction of all of that bottled up emotion coming out. Though with that, Maggie says that she'll continue with Glenn's wish of moving to the hilltop, and so she together with Sophia get ready to go. But just before they do that, there is a moment between Carl and Sophia where they apologize to each other, and Carl says that he wasn't actually going to shoot Maggie and that he's very sorry about her dad. But Sophia then asks, "Everyone around me dies. Is it because of me?" And Carl just calmly answers, "No, it's just the way it is." Keep this interaction in mind for later, and note Carl's reaction to this whole thing. he really isn't that scared at all. As for the TV version, Maggie never hits Rick or anything like that, but rather she immediately tells him to go to Alexandria and get everyone ready for a war. The whole vibe in the show is much more downright depressing than it is angry, and a lot of that is because Maggie herself is also terribly sick, so her just stumbling around just makes the whole thing that much worse. But the most tragic thing we see is of course the dream sequence, where we see everyone in Alexandria sitting around that dinner table which Negan mentioned to Rick. And oh man, this scene is the epitome of salt in the wound. There is an extended version of it online which is just super wholesome, but in the context of this episode, oh man, it is absolutely heartbreaking. It absolutely nails the emotional dichotomy we see in this episode, and it's just the cherry on top. But with that is Negan's introduction. To very quickly summarize the differences, in the book, the Glenn kill happens and that's it, Negan leaves. In the show, on the other hand, Abe gets bonked first, then Daryl punches him and gets yoinked away by Dwight to the sanctuary, and Glenn also gets bonked as additional punishment. And on top of that, Negan takes Rick on a date and plays some extensive mind games with him, as well as almost makes him chop Carl's arm off. And only after all that, he finally leaves as well. And so with that, next time we'll be properly delving into Season 7 and the many changes the adaptation made. From changing the order of events to new characters and communities and everything in between. And that's the video. A bit of a different one considering how much meta talk there was this time round, but one that turned out to be one of my favorites so far. So I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Though with that, I want to say a massive thank you to our current patrons who allow me to produce even more of these for you all. And let's also give a warm welcomes to the newest members of the team, Max13, Theli11, and Novicus. I am sorry if I butchered the pronunciation. Without you, there'd be a whole lot less of my rambling, so seriously, thank you. Other than that, I want to say thank you very much for watching, I hope you have a great day, and hopefully, I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.